Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Roy Reads Anything. And because I've reached that milestone of 1,000 subscribers, which is very lovely, I thought I'd fancy up the sign a bit. So, yes,
Is that gold leaf?
it is gold leaf. Didn't really work very well. You should don't go in the garden for a while.
Is that my gold leaf?
No. We secret to happy marriage is separate craft supplies.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a sort of recent reads type of thing. So talking about stuff I've read over the past couple of weeks, including Dracula Asylum. So Dracula, the real book by Bram Stoker, is a group read on Criminoli's Patreon. But I could read Dracula any number of times, I think, but I had read it pretty recently. Also listened to the audiobook, which was good in the past sort of year. So didn't really feel like plunging into that again. Although Dracula is an excellent choice for October reading because it's a sort of an occult detective book. You know, the Van Helsing character you could see as an occult detective. Also, perhaps less obviously, but I think Mina Harker is an occult detective as well. But hard to explain why without bringing in lots of spoilers for people who haven't read the book. Also, it's Witcover, Victorian books, and I think there's a prompt there for first-person narratives, which Dracula is, of several people, and also there's a sort of a bit of a new woman vibe, I think, again, to the Mina character. Anyway, but I didn't read it, so what am I talking about? I read Dracula Asylum. So this book,
Classy.
here's the thing. So Dark Horse, in about 2005, publishers commissioned a bunch of sequel novels to classic Universal monster films. So the Universal monsters, Universal Studios, classic horror films that came out in the 30s, 40s, 50s, with, ignoring the Phantom of the Opera, characters like Dracula, the Mummy, Bride of Frankenstein, Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon. So their idea was follow-on novels to those movies, and I've managed to get most of them. So there's a Frankenstein one I've talked about on here, The Shadow of Frankenstein, for which I broke my No Jack the Ripper rule. There is no higher praise. The Creature from the Black Lagoon one, Times Black Lagoon by Paul de Filippo, a really good science fiction novel by pretty much any standards. The Mummy, Dark Resurrection, took place in modern times, pretty good. And absolute favourite, The Bride of Frankenstein sequel by Elizabeth Hand, Pandora's Bride, where the Bride of Frankenstein, who we can see here perhaps, survives the movie and goes to Berlin, and it's Berlin in the 30s, and it's like cabaret and stuff like that, and it's hilarious. But I hadn't got the Dracula one. I still haven't got the Wolfman one. It's one of those books that comes up on for sale at ridiculous prices, and I'm not buying it for, I won't pay any money for it. But I did manage to get the Dracula one by Paul Witcover, and it's an ex-library copy, so nothing special as a book. I've got the word cancelled written on it.
Cancel culture.
Yeah. But obviously a good reading copy. So bear in mind it's a sequel to the movie. So 1930s Dracula film is the one with Bela Lugosi, and sort of a classic. Very much a classic, really, because I think from that movie we get vampires wearing evening dress, we get that kind of accent, we get, it's a very atmospheric gothic movie, but it's not the same as Bram Stoker's book. It was actually based on a play, and because of that, it's very compressed, so there are fewer locations and the characters have been reduced as well. So it's a smaller cast. Renfield, for instance, it's Renfield rather than Jonathan Harker, who's the solicitor who goes to Dracula's castle. And most of the action takes place in Dr. Seward's asylum and a now nearby abbey, which is fine. So that's how the movie works. Great film if you've never seen it. Geeky thing to watch out for as well. Another movie was made on the same sets at night, a Spanish version, which I think you can see on YouTube. So basically, it was like a simultaneous remake. And there are some nice things about that movie as well. Different cast. Anyway, yes. So sequel. So that very asylum, it's now the First World War. And that asylum is now used as a hospital for servicemen who have got mental problems resulting from the First World War. And the protagonist, Lisa Watson, is a doctor whose fiance is in this hospital. And he's suffering from what we'd now call PTSD. He's retreated into his own mind and actually has an unshakable hallucination thing that he is Sherlock Holmes. And she, defying all ethics, has arranged to come here so she can treat him and be with him. So that's how she arrives at the asylum where the action of Dracula took place in the movie. And meanwhile, Dracula, who was staked by Van Helsing, is brought back to life, and that's all happening as well. Now,
is it life or is it on death?
No, well, it's on death. Yes, exactly. Yeah. For the first half of the book, I thought, okay, what we have here is a pretty good First World War novel and an okay supernatural story. He's obviously researched lots of First World War stuff, but they do come together. They come together really nicely and cleverly. There's lots of jeopardy. The way the way Dracula's portrayed brings in some sort of interesting lore about how how the vampire would react to the carnage of World War One, for instance. So yeah, really liked it. There were some mega twists at the end. Some of that I didn't quite go along with, but it certainly takes the story places you wouldn't maybe expect it to go. So lots and lots of fun. My only minor quibble is it doesn't quite gel with the second Universal Dracula movie, Dracula's Daughter, where the way that movie begins doesn't quite work with the way this book ends. But that doesn't matter really. So yeah, Dracula Asylum, pretty good read. Also, in the world of group reads, Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, the brainchild of Michael K. Vaughan, Ghost Stories of an Antiquary by M.R. James is the October book. So this is I love the simplicity of this Penguin edition, but I'm actually reading it in the Oxford collection. Collected Ghost Stories of M.R. James is like a sort of authoritative text with lots of really useful notes. Now these stories are old friends, really. This book and its follow-up, more Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, were around in our house when I was growing up. I was fascinated by the paintings on the covers. I struggled to read them when I was too young to read them, but eventually the first one I sort of successfully read was The Mezzotint, which is a great story. So M.R. James, if you've not read them, I would say Read them. Don't read about them. Just read them, because they're sort of quiet horror, and the creepiness. It's usually like one element. So if you've read some stuff and you know basically what's going to happen, you'll be missing out on some of the creepiness. I guess another reason I feel familiar with these is that here in Britain, there's been a sort of Christmas tradition since the very early 70s of an M.R. James or similar story appearing on the BBC around Christmas time. So there's been loads of adaptations over the years, tend to be quite short movies. Some of them are really, really good. It hasn't been every single year, but for the past few years, there's been some. So sort of read them, seen them. They're atmospheric. They can actually be quite funny in places. M.R. James, who was the master of a college, can't remember whether it's Oxford or Cambridge. That's terrible, isn't it? He would read them aloud, so they sort of have that element to them. Yes, may I help you?
Can I tell them about the ghost story being read aloud at school?
You can if you want.
Shall I tell it now?
Yes.
Or wait till the end?
No, now.
So when I was at secondary school, I would have been about 12 or 13. And I went to a grammar school where we still had to learn Latin compulsorily for the first 3 years. But our Latin teacher, Edward Chittum, no mean writer of ghost stories himself, at the end of terms, for a treat, used to read us ghost stories instead of doing Latin. And the one time he read "O Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad." Is that the whole time?
Yeah. I think it might be just "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You,"
which is absolutely, utterly, totally and completely the most terrifying thing I'd ever heard at the age of 13. I didn't like horror and I didn't like ghost stories, but he thought he thought it was such a treat for us, bless him. And I was so terrified that the only way I could get to sleep for the next week was for my mom to sleep in my bed with me.
What?
Because I was so terrified. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw it waving at him.
It
waved
don't
at him.
Tell him the things, but
so
yes.
I'm not telling him the things. So yeah, scarred me for life.
Excellent.
But I do think it's probably the best ghost story ever written.
So yeah, I
think.
I can see that as a legitimate viewpoint. I would say read it, and there are some good adaptations. On YouTube, you got a very old black and white one featuring Michael Horder, and that's great. I did not like the John Hurt adaptation that's fairly recent because it added a lot of stuff and it kind of explains everything. But you can make your own mind up about that. And bizarrely, it was used as the basis of a daytime soap opera story, which sounds like that ought to suck, but it didn't. That's a pretty good adaptation too. I'll try and remember to put links on.
They cancelled Doctors.
Right.
Which is the daytime soap of which you speak.
Okay.
I don't know if it was because of that episode, but they just cancelled it.
It's too terrifying.
Very recently, which is a shame.
Also, been reading some comics. So because of my forthcoming Cleovember reading event, I've been trying to read every single appearance of Cleopatra in a comic. And as part of that, I reactivated my Marvel Unlimited subscription for a brief period. Delving into that, I quite like the character Hellcat, Patsy Walker. I just love the fact that she was a teenage humour character and then she became a superhero, and that all of that stuff is sort of included in the story. So I noticed there was some new Patsy Walker stuff and it linked in with Iron Man. So I read quite a long run of Iron Man stuff too. I don't generally like modern comics. I was enjoying the Iron Man until eventually the whole thing got too introspective, and I kind of ran out of steam with it, really. But a little dip into the world of modern Marvel. As for the comics with Cleopatra, wow, you have to wait to see what that's all about. And because booktube events never end, been carrying on with the Shakespeare stuff. So the sort of MO we've developed of watching an adaptation and then sort of reading it continues. So we've been watching The Hollow Crown, Richard II, both parts of Henry IV we've seen so far. Really good, and get a lot out of having the text. These RSC versions, you get scene summaries that are useful. We do sometimes stop the DVD and figure out what's been going on. But also just reading and getting the language and the full text is a lovely thing. So a little bit of Shakespeare too. That has been my recent read. So thanks for watching. Back soon with something else. Bye.